Welcome back to the Roads to Wealth podcast. I'm your host, Josh Rhodes, and I have a hell of an episode in store for you guys today. I typically like to do these introductions just kind of shooting from the hip. I'll have a bullet or two jotted down to kind of keep me on track. This is not that guest. She has a track record, a successful track record, 1.5 miles long. I wouldn't be able to do her justice shooting from the hip. She was actually ranked number 2 networker in the world after one of her books were launched. I wanted to go through and jot down some of the points in her journey just to kind of get you guys some insight into who we're speaking with and where this experience is coming from. I had roughly 50-ish minutes with her before the meeting was kind of cut short. She realized she had overlapping meetings and gave me all she could. I do want to make note really quickly that this was recorded right before the coronavirus hit. I only say that because we're talking about cash flow and angel investing, and there's all things considered. I just think it's important to note that. Today's guest is Judy Robinett. Judy has over 30 years of experience as an entrepreneur and as a corporate leader. She has served as a CEO of both public and private companies, as well as management positions in Fortune 500 companies. She's on the advisory board of several venture capital firms, as well as other businesses that have actually reached out to her and looked to her to leverage her network and expertise. We'll dive more into that piece here in the episode. And she's actually the managing director of Golden Seeds Angel Network, which is the third most active and one of the largest investing groups in the United States. Finally, Judy was actually a member of the Department of Commerce team that defined the performance criteria for the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award for Excellence in Healthcare. Because of that, she received an award from President Bill Clinton. I thought that was a pretty cool looking feather in the cap. Today, Judy is the author of 2 books, Crack the Funding Code and How to Be a Power Connector. She's actually given 400 speeches, over 400 speeches worldwide, and continues to consult internationally. She works with businesses that are actually looking for investors and seriously blew me away with some of her stories and lessons that she shares in today's episode. With that, let's get to it. Judy Robinett.
It's the road to the wealth. I do it for health. For my kids and my spouse. Financially sound. You're the bad dad.
Well, Judy, I cannot thank you enough for being on the platform. I've done 3, 4, maybe even longer than that, weeks of research and preparation. And just due to how broad your background and what you do is, going into this morning, I was still unsure where the hell I wanted to start. Just to be totally honest with you, I think before I tear the cover off the ball and we dig too deep into the weeds on any topic, I think it'd make most sense for maybe just a broad stroke of who you are and what you have going on.
So, I am an author and a speaker, an investor, and work with global companies seeking to enter the United States and, sit on VC boards and angel groups.
And obviously, right out of Utah State, you weren't dealing with these enterprise businesses that are looking to come over to the U.S. and VC firms. So if we could backtrack and you kind of just walk me through maybe your journey, where you got started and sort of the growth, maybe the journey of how you've gotten to this point you're at today.
Yeah. So I started life as a social worker and decided about 3.5 years in, I couldn't stand to see any more beat or abuse kids, and went back and got a master's in econ, kind of human resource emphasis, and went to work for a couple of Fortune 50 corporations. And man, I was good for about 3 years. And then I would start getting nauseous on Sunday night, thinking about going to work on Monday morning. And I happened to be giving a presentation at MIT, and somebody handed me a Wall Street Journal, and it had this article on how to become financially independent in America. And it said 4 ways: be a doctor, a lawyer, inherit it, or marry it were the first 4. And I thought, well, those are out. And the 5th one was start a business. And I thought, how hard could it be? And I got a $1.3 million SBA loan and started, stupid me, a franchise restaurant. Learned lots of tough lessons. At one point thought I was going bankrupt. Went to a bankruptcy attorney. And, he looked at my financials and said, "You're not even close." And I said, "But I'm broke." And he said, "Judy, they can break you, but they can't eat you." And that allowed me to really kick fear to the curb and move forward. I successfully turned it around with the help of a couple of other folks and sold it. And then people started bringing me kind of troubled companies, and worked with several of those, and was asked to become CEO of a small publicly traded biotech company, which I did for 10 years and raised many, many millions of dollars in a tough situation. They were out of money in litigation and had been delisted. And I love challenges, but that one was a big bite. But what I found is every time you do one of those, you learn. It puts steel up your spine. And then I was asked to look at this unknown startup out of Park City called Skull Candy. And the founder had been bankrupt 2 or 3 times. And so, investors were a little leery about investing their money in him. And I helped him a bit, and I watched as he went public and sold that or had a valuation of under $500 million. And I became very fascinated with the startup world. I had learned how to raise money. I joined Golden Seeds as a managing director, one of the largest angel groups in the United States. 300 accredited investors, mostly women, but many men, and learned how to do due diligence, and then kind of went out on my own with a couple of other investors. My first foray, I think I lost $100,000 real quickly off the bat because I didn't know what I was doing, and found out I just love a challenge. I love making things happen and putting things together. And I had built a pretty powerful network. And I'd learned a long time ago that you can't get very far without other people. People know the deals, they write the checks. And it helped that I had learned that there's no lack of resources. There's 317 trillion of private wealth. There's no lack of money, no lack of information, no lack of ideas. And those are really the building blocks. And so that's what launched me. And after doing a couple of turnarounds and being involved with angel groups and then a couple of VCs, I was asked to do a diplomatic mission to Serbia. And Kevin Harrington asked me to meet an entrepreneur over there. And I've spent the past 2 years helping him very successfully come to the US. Probably a long story.
Yeah, I guess speaks to why I was so pumped for the call today. I guess right out of college, you do a few years of jumping in the rat race. You spin your tires and you realize, you're making a little money and you're starting to build at least a foundation. But I'm sure a lot of people resonate. I resonate with the fact Sunday night rolls around and, oh shit, here comes Monday, right? And you've got it's back in the saddle. Most people deal with that, but it's not the right approach, right?
Yeah.
My hesitation is I hear you going to your first gig. If I heard you right, the first restaurant sort of franchise or chain you opened, you invested a little over $1 million in. Did I hear that right?
Well, I invested, I believe it was $250,000 or $300,000 of my own money. And then I got an SBA loan of $1.3 million.
So I think that's going to be my first question is during your first few years of pre-Judy becoming Judy and you taking on businesses and you're going through this grind that most of us are dealing with, were you doing any investing or building? Did you know you were going to do something by yourself? And so any excess income or money you had, you were putting that off to the side for your own venture? Or, with this excess cash flow that you're creating, what were you doing with that?
I wasn't doing much. I had never met a millionaire. I didn't know anything about investing. I frankly didn't own any stock. But my last corporate job was with a giant corporation, EG&G, that was, came out of Egerton, out of MIT. And I was close to the head of the legal department who one day took me aside and said, you need to start putting money in a 401k and start thinking about investing. And then previously I'd had one experience as a vice president of a hospital and was introduced to another friend who was an attorney who convinced me to join kind of a group that taught you how to invest in the stock market. And it's a famous little group that was, featured by these little old women in Illinois who were, just kicking the butt of regular people on Wall Street. So just slowly I got introduced, and then I read, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I realized that I was, helping making other people rich. I used to look around and go, what is this? What am I doing wrong? And it was, I didn't understand equity.
Just as a sidebar, I think Rich Dad, Poor Dad has touched more lives than any other book. I mean, it is the financial Bible. I hear that book comes up. I finished it my second time last year. That book comes up so often. So for anybody that hasn't had the chance to pick it up, I would definitely recommend that book. It is incredible. So I want to spend most of our time today talking about some of the points that you've brought up. I mean, one, your primary business of you working with these startups, two, the networking piece. So before I dive into either of those too deeply, can you maybe just give a broad stroke of the different revenue streams you've created and that you see today? Understanding, I mean, you own J. Robinett Enterprises, you've written a book, so there's two there, right? I'm assuming you've done some investing with startups. Kind of help me understand the portfolio as a whole, if you can.
Yeah, so you're right. Many years ago, I was asked if I would work with a billionaire who'd had 2 IPOs, and I went and looked at what he was doing, and they had asked for my help, and I thought, oh my gosh, this guy wants me to raise billions of dollars. It was a huge capex, but it wasn't. He wanted me to help him get in some very specific doors, like Boeing and such. And I did that, and I was given, or I earned as compensation, 70,000 shares of stock. His first 2 IPOs went public at just under $100 a share. And so that was kind of one of the bigger eye-openers after investing in some smaller startups.
Yeah, I bet it was.
I decided that I could see a pattern. I lost money initially. I was introduced to a fellow in New York City, and he has had 60 investments. He's, very wealthy, deep-pocketed. And I said to him, how did you do this? And he said he became friends with a couple of VCs who then told him about specific deals. And so I started seeing a pattern that I could do lots of due diligence. I could belong to angel groups and spend a lot of time and a lot of money doing that. But the reality is that if I had key relationships with people that had kind of deep pockets and deep expertise, that I could get further ahead and also work with proven serial entrepreneurs. So that was, nobody's ever asked me this, frankly, Josh, but you've pulled out some really good things. And that one was also key for me. And, who's not going to turn down an introduction by Kevin Harrington of Shark Tank fame for an entrepreneur in Serbia? And that one has allowed me pretty extensive preferred stock for the portfolio. And I think that one will be a quicker exit. And then something else that I learned that you could bring up is I became friends with the fellow who actually took Skull Candy public, introduced me to Dr. David Beers out of Salt Lake, who is a cancer oncologist, research, just amazing expert. And he started a company called Montogen that he then sold to Supergen in Walnut Creek. And I think it was $45 million in cash plus stock.
Jeez.
And the company was 3 years old. Now, I'd been in biotech. I mean, he didn't even have a product, right?
Yeah.
And I said to him, David, how did you do this? And he said, I anticipated who the most likely acquirer would be. And I got one person off of each of those 4 companies to watch in full transparency what we were doing. And then they kind of got into a bidding war. And so I became much more strategic. So for the kid who, my family was a military family, not officers, but enlisted. My father and, I didn't know anybody of wealth. My family certainly never had stock portfolio. My family never even had a credit card. Now I'm, soon to be 67 here, so I'm not a youngster. But my grandmother and my father both bought savings bonds. And when I first became a social worker, I did that every paycheck. And I had been taught never go into debt, how dangerous debt was. And my dad had become quite an entrepreneur after retiring from the military. He was just a guru fixing cars. He was like an engineer in the military. And so he kind of had a business, and that had a bit of an impact on me. But I'll tell you, Josh, when I had the restaurant, they lost the safe that we'd ordered for keep the money in the office. And the first weekend I think it was $70,000 cash in a paper bag in the back of my car because I couldn't figure out how to open the night deposit box. The owner of the bank actually came on Sunday and I told him, and he about croaked and said, let's go down there right now. I remember holding this $70,000 and thinking, why did I work for somebody else? Now, it turned out to be a very difficult, first 7, 8 years for me. I turned it around and sold it, then was asked to help with this troubled public company that was delisted and in litigation. And I had no intentions of running the company. I went to give them advice. I always try to really add extreme value. And the chairman said to me like 3 times, we'd like you to be the CEO. And I said, oh, I can't be the CEO of a public company. And finally I thought, hello, you used to think if you were born a guy, you could be a CEO, just have a little faith, jump in. And, after having faith, jumping in deep with the franchise and surviving it, I had built more steel up my spine. And so, I did that and raised millions from a hedge fund. And then I learned the funding ecosystem. I mean, if I could raise money in kind of really dire straits, and I found out it was kind of this clandestine world, and it was tough to break into if you didn't know what you were doing, someone like me initially. But I found out there was no lack of money, and that the biggest problem all the investors on the planet have is finding a great deal, which solves the problem of all the entrepreneurs or people in search of funding. And it has to do with how you position yourself, your pitch, but most importantly, getting those warm introductions and making sure you position yourself as a high potential startup, which is being really clear on your exit and who's possibly going to buy you. And number 2, mitigating risk is viewed by the investor. So, I did, read, somebody recommended I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, but I never went into real estate. That really didn't have much interest to me. But the comment about, making other people rich, hit home. And I actually played the rat race many times with some of my friends, and it, changed. So it was this, I've always believed in learning. I'm a voracious reader. And what happened, my network started going up. And at first I was just like so in awe and humbled and probably, really feeling the imposter syndrome. But eventually I found out all these people are just alike. Everybody that's alive has got a problem. So now I get invited to private curated events. Tomorrow I'm flying to the Consumer Electronics Show for a private event by Intel Capital, which is called ICAP, with a couple of their syndication partners. I fly home on Saturday. I fly to New York City for a private black tie event with the National Retail Federation. And, at my table are, I think, at least two billionaires. And I've been to the White House. I've been to places I would have never envisioned. And I've learned that you be generous, that you really not only care about people, but you go out of your way to help, make introductions, share information. And that has been a guiding principle that has moved me forward through, being really afraid to take risk. But I loved learning. And, I started seeing that there was a whole new world out there.
Yeah. First, your story is so inspirational, especially I didn't know, even from our offline conversation, I didn't know you and I come from a very similar background in that our parents, my parents, if I could just speak on myself, knew hard work, but financial literacy or being able to build wealth. My father, stepmother, my biological side, nobody really understood the concept of that, right? Having your money work for you.
Yeah.
Or really, the thought of your dad being an entrepreneur, that was probably a huge mover for you and just giving you some guidance. You mentioned you're an avid reader. You've hit, just in that story there, a few really deep lulls, right? You open your initial business and it hits rock bottom and you have a few folks around you and they help you sort of build this back up and you sell it. And then from there, it almost sounds like you have an expertise in going into these businesses that have tanked and doing this restaurant rescue, right? And bringing them back from the dead. So my question, where did you build or how did you sort of develop that expertise?
Great question. I need to keep you connected when I do my next book so you can ask me these great questions that dig out information. This is kind of we don't have to go into this, but when my dad retired from the military, we moved to Franklin, Idaho, home of Napoleon Dynamite movie. And I was 10 and he marched me to the local Mormon church. There was the only church in town. My father's family is all Southern Baptist. My mother's family was LDS Mormon, but neither of my parents were active. I think maybe he was afraid I'd become a hippie. But one of the first things I remember learning as a kid at church was the glory of God was intelligence, and that you would be so much further ahead in the next life if you learned. And I thought I was dumb. And so, I studied, but, I love to read. I can read very fast. There was probably more to it than just that. And I realized how critical education was. I thought I was dumb. I didn't necessarily do well in high school. And, finally, I think at my second year at college, I just kind of caught fire on learning. So when I went into the corporate world, I went to it's called the INEL in Idaho. It's the largest conglomerate of nuclear reactors in the world. Most people don't know that. It's the size of New Hampshire, and 10,000 of the best scientists, nuclear engineers, doctorate. When I was there, we were doing Star Wars top secret, projects, but the company was heavy into training. Heavy into training. I took almost every kind of training you could get. I took communications training, which involved being on TV, so one of the nuclear reactors explodes or there is a problem, what do you do? I took value engineering classes. I took project management classes. I took leadership classes. I was then identified as they called it a star manager. And I quickly went from a single employee to a group manager. I actually bypassed the individual manager level. And that put me in a position to be close to the vice president of the company, who asked me to put together an employee association. And he said he'd had 6 or 7 of the direct reports to the CEO try to do it, and they couldn't get it done. Well, I got it done in 3 months. And after that, I got asked to be on special projects, to write a proposal that was worth $1.2 billion. I wrote a section of that. I was asked to write policy for the company, which then involved me to get on to the DOE, the Department of Energy, which at all these facilities, there's like the key contractors like Westinghouse and Battelle, and then there's always usually a DOE component with administration, legal, environmental, all of that kind of stuff. And so I jumped in to be on committees, and I think I probably always had a leadership component. So even in graduate school, I was terrified I would flunk out. So, I would volunteer to take on all the committees because I was going to make darn sure we got A's. And the assistant dean, who was my mentor, called me in one day and said, sit down. And he said, we really need to talk. And he said, the guys that are on your committees don't want you to run them anymore. And I said, what? He said to me, they said you're too aggressive. And I literally, Josh, got up, went over to his desk, and I went, I am not aggressive. Who said I'm aggressive? And then I went home, cried, all the way home. And he said, later to me, you've got to care about people's feelings. And I thought, feelings? Who cares about feelings? We've got work to do. But there were several kind of events that happened that, propelled me to keep learning. And the Idaho National Engineering Lab, EG&G, was a profound experience. This was in the 1980s. We actually had a computer system to all employees all over the world. If we wanted to find an engineer who could speak French and Swahili, plus had engineering specific for 3 Mile Island disaster, which we did the cleanup for, we could do it. So we were networked, and we had our own library. I would give my secretary, they would bring me the content of Harvard Business Review, MIT, different journals, and I would highlight what articles I wanted to read, and they would be delivered to my desk.
Check that out.
So, I had my own graphic artist. When I gave speeches, it would actually draw slides. It was the old days when you had slides. And so I just swallowed as much knowledge as I could, as much learning as I could. I was still really shy, but I would the need for learning, and I liked adventure. I love challenges. I like making things happen. It's taken me years to figure out, somebody did an interview with me recently and said, what's your number one thing? And I said, strategic networking. And later I thought, it's not that, it's strategy. That's just a piece of the building blocks.
What I hear, I mean, obviously you're a sponge, and you hear that from, I mean, it sounds like you were that way from an early age. Second year of college is what I heard. And from that point forward, you were a sponge in every sense of the word. Mentorships, books, classes, training programs, everything. A second thing that I'm picking up is you work hard and you have this servant mentality or the servant attitude. I mean, to an nth degree. You're going above and beyond for RFPs and for bosses, and you had the opportunity to even skip a level in that corporate ladder because of that. I mean, the hard work, your ability to submerge yourself in this knowledge base and then serve those around you has done wonders. I mean, that's not to boil your story down too much, but I mean, that's what I'm picking up.
Absolutely. And then when I got over being shy, I mean, I read, How to Win Friends and Influence People in the Corporate World, because I could see these other people were doing better and I couldn't figure out what it was. And it turns out, behind the corporate structure is the true influencers of power who make decisions. And so I, at one point, made it a game to see if I could talk to anybody, any stranger, anywhere. And I can literally. I have no trouble talking to anybody, anywhere. I've even interrupted people. I walked into a Whole Foods recently, and I was walking past a table with 4 guys, and they're talking about a deal. And I mean, my head just swivels,
Yeah.
And I heard the guy recommend a book. And I said, excuse me, could you tell me the name of that book? And I told him I had just flown in from New York for an event at the United Nations, which piqued their interest, and I knew it would. And I ended up becoming, friends with them. But, I've overheard people, a couple of founders at a Barnes & Noble once, talking about getting funded. And they were doing everything right, but they said a couple of things that were just horribly wrong. And I turned around and I said, listen, I'm an investor. I would be happy to give you some advice here. They took notes for a half an hour. And what I find is if I help people, I learn. And there's almost always good things that come out of it. So 2 years ago, I was asked to be on a panel at the Northwest Technology Summit at its Walmart's headquarters. And, Intel, Salesforce, all these powerhouses are there. And I heard, who's the vice president of sales at Intel, powerful, smart woman, talk about the future of technology. It's probably the best speech I've ever heard. And I made it a point at the reception to go up and ask if I could get her slides and ask if there was anything she was interested in. And I suggested to her she should consider getting on some advisory boards. And we became very good friends, which resulted in me becoming involved with Intel Capital, with, the National Retail Federation. I don't want to use her name specifically if we bring it up, but I have found that it's always surprising to me. I mean, she has a budget of $3 billion and 400 people. And man, I can help her get on boards and happy to do that. She's probably 40. She's a powerhouse. And I love now, there's a quote that says, when you're younger, you wonder how far you'll go. And when you get older, you wonder what difference you will make, you've made in life. And so I love to teach. I mean, not only do I love to learn, I really love to teach.
Yeah.
So I figure if I can save people some bricks to the head that I've had, I should.
Yeah. Yeah. And we all appreciate it. That's right. So today, I mean, it's no surprise, and I've witnessed this firsthand with you now. You do a ton of traveling. You're consulting with businesses. You're of all shapes and sizes. It doesn't sound like, I mean, maybe you have a specific vertical you'd prefer, but it doesn't sound like you're dedicated to a specific vertical. Overall, how many businesses are you dealing with today? And I guess that's sort of two-pronged because you've invested in some and then you're working with some, right? So how many businesses are you involved with today?
3. I'm a part owner of the company that out of Belgrade. I own a nice percentage of the company, plus I'm going to be getting a large bunch of pref stock. I'm helping a startup in Utah that was referred to me, and I told them, they're poorer than a church mouse, and I told them if they'd pay me $2,000 a month, I'd help them get funded, and I've almost got that done in 2 months.
Wow.
And they have a consumer product that's called Trail Truffles, and I'm going to help them get into Walmart. And one of the groups that runs the Walton Family's Entrepreneurial Center has a fund, and they're presenting to him today. And so I, typically will help a couple of smaller groups because I'm impressed with the founders. And, that's the number one thing is the team. And it turns out it's persistence and learning that get you everywhere. And so some of these, folks, I'll feel kind of sorry for a bit and just quickly jump on and help them because I can, or there's some specific reason for. And then I work with another platform coming out of California. One of the founders built and sold his mathematical platform to Microsoft. The other founder is off of Wall Street, and it will be related to crowdfunding. So I'm doing consulting with them. I also work with a VC that I'll get carry in their deals, much to what I was telling you about, make sure that you hang your hat behind somebody who really knows what they're doing. And, I just got back in November, I went to Kiev and spoke at the World Economic Forum. Jack Ma was the opening speaker. And I love doing that because I love travel and adventure. And while I was there, somebody in the United States said, hey, you ought to meet my business partner in Kiev. I met a gentleman who manages billions of dollars of family office money, who is also supposedly going to invite me to some black tie event in New York again this month. I didn't think I was going to travel at all. I've got 4 trips so far.
Yeah, 0 to 4. Yeah.
So,
so you've mentioned this a couple of times, and I purposefully been dancing around it because I knew I wanted to save it till the middle of this. But you're involved in what sounds like, let's call it less than half a dozen, 3, 4, 5 businesses today that on different aspects. Out of the gate, I'm assuming there's a vetting process that need to be held or that you need to have a run through to find that first deal. I'm assuming now that you've got this stellar network, that your network produces most of your investing opportunities. My question to you is, I guess, 1, where are those investing opportunities coming from? And 2, what sort of vetting process do you put them through pre-onboarding?
So I haven't been investing for the past few years. I sit on 2 VC boards, and I'm an advisor to Springboard. We've raised $10 billion, had $10 billion in M&A activity. And so I haven't been doing that. I've really focused a lot of focus on the book that came out this year and the one that came out in 2014, then got published in Spanish. So I've been doing, lots of traveling, lots of speaking, stuff like that. But if I'm first, it is who recommends the company, who recommends the company, who else is involved in the deal. And so I would prefer to have people that, have had prior success. They understand the due diligence process. And, now I tend to try to find companies that are going to have an earlier exit. I mean, when I was younger and, it was all well and good to have companies that were 7 and 10 years out, but that doesn't work so well at my age now. So, it is mainly who are the players in the deal. And then I look closely at the team and, the market and, potential ROI.
I want to put us in a hypothetical here in a second, just to kind of make that more realistic for us. But before I go there, you have a full chapter in your new book that's dedicated to mentorship and people. You've got a whole book about being a power connector. So in this power connector or this Malcolm Gladwell sort of connector type role, on your LinkedIn, you mentioned you've got, I think I wrote it down, a titanium Rolodex. What are the components of a titanium Rolodex? Right? I mean, if I wanted to start building my network and I wanted to get a Judy network, and knowing I came from a very similar background of my parents didn't bless me with, hey, here's the CEO of this company and you should know this guy, and they're eating dinner with us. I'm meeting folks like you where I'm either being introduced to them or I'm hitting people on LinkedIn. So who do I target and what do I need to start doing to assemble that Rolodex? And it may not be platinum out of the gate or titanium, but I could have an aluminum one.
Yeah, somebody just said that and it kind of
I love it.
Then it kind of took off, and I think I was ranked the number 2 networker in the world after my first book came out. And so that was all fun, but it depends on what your goal is, Josh. So your project, it's kind of like, Stephen Covey stole it, I believe, from Disraeli, begin with the end in mind. But be clear on what it is that you're after, and then determine who it is you need to know, and then you figure out how you're going to get to know them. And so you can share what project or what you're working on. And then, I teach people, I call it the 2 golden questions. You ask, what other ideas do you have for me? And who else do you know I should talk to? So I focus, number 1, on building relationships. How can I help you? I tell people it's critical to get the first date and you want to continue that relationship. And, eventually you can tell them what you're up to. and then ask for advice. And people, and research actually shows you come across as more competent when you ask for advice. And then ask who else they know. So out of the 600 to 1,000 plus people they know, you crowd surf literally in their network to find the best people. And then, pretty soon you've moved up a level, and then you say to that person that was sent to you, what other ideas? Who else do you know? And this has landed me on panels with Mark Cuban. I've been to private events at the White House, not with Trump, thankfully. And if you add value, if you just really add value to other people, then it's amazing. These things will come up you would have never guessed that. But you know what? I've got another thing at 9:00 I've got to do. So I think we will have to reschedule.
Understood. Yeah, that's not a problem at all. We'll cut this off. I had a handful of questions. Maybe at some point we can book a round 2 of this.
Okay.
I really, really appreciate you being flexible here, giving me some of your time. You are constantly on the move. So I cannot thank you enough. For the folks that needed to or would like to get a hold of you, where can they find you?
So Judy at judyrobinett.com. And I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter and such.
Beautiful. I mentioned a couple times here in our podcast, you've got 2 books that are available. Crack the Funding Code as one, which I've completed. The second one I'm in the midst of, I'm about halfway through now, of How to Be a Power Connector, both of which are stellar and can be purchased anywhere you can find books. Judy, that's all I've got. Again, I really appreciate your time. For the folks that are listening, thank you all for your ears. And as always, stay on that grind. I promised you a stellar episode. And I think the only complaint is that we couldn't go longer, right? I mean, she was a powerhouse, and I could have gone for another couple hours. Know that I do have a hook in the water here. I'm hoping to have a part 2, just because there's so much that I'd like to unpack with Judy. As always, I have 2 or 3 big takeaways here. One, her ability to network is just impeccable. Her story of her walking along and there was a group of guys at the bar and they're talking about business and she's able to just pick up a conversation and they're still friends today. That ability, I don't know if that is something you're born with or if you can sort of swallow your sort of shyness, right? I don't know. I love the networking ability. It's something that I feel I'm okay at, but could definitely improve on. The second point was her ability or the thought of building sweat equity. I like this for a couple of reasons. One, I mean, it was something a little off the wall. It's a little different, something that we don't typically hear about, right? We hear about investing capital and a bunch of money and then that business growing and you at some point being able to pull your money out. But what about for those that don't have capital, don't have a lot of money to invest in an organization? How can we build that equity? And the thought that, you can have a skill set or even more impressively, a network that can earn you equity in a company due to good introductions to employees or other investors. They're willing to give you equity. There's a lot there. I have 2 books on my nightstand. One is How to Get Rich by Felix Dennis, which is a great book by just this entrepreneur, kind of a silly, funny book. The other one is Your Network is Your Net Worth by Porter Gale. And I think Judy is a billboard example of having what she calls a titanium network, or a titanium Rolodex. She is a billboard for that. Finally, sort of a subtle point that she made that kind of hit home for me. It was money and resources are easy to find, but that you can't get anywhere without the right people. It's interesting that all 3 of those points there hover around networking and people. But the final point of going out and finding investments or capital or building wealth, that's the easy part. Finding who to surround yourself with, good co-founders, good just people in a mastermind group or people to push you. That is one of the most important pieces and definitely one of the biggest takeaways I had from Judy. As always, I am extremely grateful for Judy, her efforts, the attitude, just amazing takeaways that she left us with. If you enjoyed that, definitely reach out to her. Feel free to ping me, info@roadstowealth.com. My ask this week is if you have a second, go into where you listen to the podcast and leave us a review. We have a goal to get to, or we're trying to double our number of views here in the next month. And so we're going to make a big push. If you have any time going in to drop a nice note, it helps me book people for the podcast. If you have any questions, guidance, ideas, something you want me to maybe do here in the future, definitely reach out to me. You can find me at any of my Roads to Wealth social media or at that email I mentioned earlier. That's all I've got for this week. I really, really appreciate your ears. I've got nothing else. Stay on your grind.
So smooth, you know what I'm saying? Q1 made the beat, by the way, just to let y'all know what's going on. Tell them, it's the road to the wealth, yeah. I do it for health, yeah. It's the road to the wealth, yeah. With my kids and my spouse, yeah. It's the road to the wealth. I do it for health, yeah. With my kids and my spouse, yeah. I'm financially sound, it's the road to the wealth, yeah. I do it for health, yeah. With my kids and my spouse, yeah. I'm financially sound. If life about purpose, it give you something to seek in. I've been setting cash goals, financially speaking. I've been finding blessings through all of these demons. I pray to God, I give you something to reach with. See, I give you something to leave with. This life about goals and achievements. Your eyes on the prize, they hit out your mind and pray to whatever beliefs in. Teach on the way, know that the beach on the way. Gotta shine hard in the teacher's water. Know that little seed, they gon' grow tomorrow. So every day, gotta come with us. So they give you something to stand on. Make the fast off when you land raw. Make you put some new friends on. It's the road to the wealth. I do it for help, yeah. With my kids and my spouse, yeah. I'm financially sound. It's the road to the wealth, yeah. I do it for health, yeah. With my kids and my spouse, yeah. I'm financially sound.